So I wanted to welcome Nelli Garton. Nelli knows us well. You might not have seen her before, but she has been on the board, I believe, right, for years. She has worked closely on strategic planning for the university with our previous dean. She's also chief evaluation officer. Is that right? Of Tablecloth?
No, CEO.
Okay, yeah, that was that.
Like your CEO, I don't know how
Like, well, this is all I do. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. I'm really excited to chat with you all. I definitely, Bianca and I had a conversation and I'm sort of, the person on the board who's like, hey, are you guys actually setting people up to get jobs? And so that's part of, I think, when you open your mouth in those settings, when someone's like, "Great, would you like to talk to me about how you should think about AI in, your career and workforce and that sort of thing. So I will just say, I do not claim to be an AI expert. I do use AI every day. And I think a lot about how companies and organizations need to protect themselves from the different risks and also how you can think about AI in terms of innovation in your organization. And so basically today I wanted to talk through a little bit of just level setting. So understanding where everybody is on their understanding and use of AI, because it is this tidal wave that is happening and it's important to understand and have a certain level of like literacy and fluency in it. But then also how can we think about using those tools for social change, for peace, for justice, and what roles might you all play in your own careers around that. And then thought I'd also give a little bit of an explanation of how we at Tablecloth, which I'll explain a little bit about my company, how we have addressed it. As many of you know, the last year and a half, it has just been this like explosive growth. And so figuring out what's safe, how do we govern this? And then we help our clients understand in their companies how to think about what policies do they put into place? How do they make sure that, there's high quality? So anyway, that's kind of the aim of the conversation. I'm really happy for this to be a conversation though. I do have slides just to like prompt myself, but I would much rather this be conversational. And so, don't hesitate, stop me as we're going along. First, I just wanted to start with like a quick temperature check if we can move on. So how many of you feel comfortable with AI? Okay. And in your feelings about it, is it more on the terrified side or the hopeful side? Like where do people land? How many terrified? Okay. Okay. How many hopeful?
Yeah.
Okay. Fair. Yeah. How many of you use it? Yeah, great. Everybody, perfect. Then we can skip through some of the basics. And then, how many of you are thinking about your different like skills and literacy of it for your future? Yeah, okay, great. We can move on. So again, sort of basics. I'm on the board and I push people a little bit on how do we make sure that folks are set up for the future. But also, I run a technology company, but I am a social change person. I never thought I would run a technology company. But there's this whole movement around ESG and impact investing that I hit upon and realized it was not undergirded with quality data. And so helping people to understand an organization's data around those things for the aim of creating stronger and more sustainable organizations is really my focus. So the other thing that I never thought I would do is I work with private equity. I work with finance. And, I was a nonprofit philanthropy, social change organizer from way back. And then I realized that a lot, you need to pay attention to where the money is and how it's moving. And so that was an area I wanted to influence. So started this company about 9 years ago. And it has evolved over time. We are both a data platform as well as we do consulting and coaching for organizations on how to integrate that data across their organizations. And, you know, we, like everybody else, have been trying to understand how do we think about artificial intelligence for both the data that we are collecting. So in our product, what should we be thinking about developing? How do we use the tools out there to make ourselves more efficient? And how does our team use that, whether that's in marketing emails, whether that is, you know, writing content pieces. I am a very firm believer, though, that our brand is built around integrity, and we are called on by folks who don't understand necessarily these data points to help them make sense of it. And that is a skill that I think everybody, you know, in this work needs to build those muscles of how do you process data? How do you make sense of it? How do you contextualize it? So that's part of what we bring to this. But then also, you know, what are the limitations of that? So we have companies' data down to personally identifiable information about every employee, including where they live, what they're paid, what their role is. That I have to protect very, very well. If that information got out, you know, that would be a breach of our contracts with our clients. And so, you know, how do we put the right safeguards around that? And then, of course, the, you know, ESG, AI is a huge governance issue. So most folks don't know that like everybody in here is already using it and using it for particular tools. And so how do we think about assessing that risk and building out the processes in organizations to ensure that that is done safely and reasonably? I think we can move ahead. So we did a quick little chat GPT on what are the different skill sets that everybody should be thinking about. And of course, the data analysis and interpretation, I think, is a really key skill that your students here are poised to be able to contribute to the field, because you might be able, you know, you can make a lot of meaning out of a lot of data, but going back to the basics of what is, you know, the scientific method, what's your hypothesis? What are we trying to understand? And then how do we use these tools to accelerate that understanding? So getting comfortable with the different types of AI tools and platforms that are out there and how you can use those, what safety components you have around them. You know, the critical thinking skills that you all are developing here on roles in social change, social justice, peace, movement building, all of that kind of thing. I'm definitely a glass half full person. And so I want to make sure that this technology that is growing right now is used for good, is used to address the problems of society, and that we can control the other components that where, you know, there is danger in it. And I understand that fear, and we need to address those fears quite realistically. I think, you know, there's an enormous role for policy advocacy and the governance pieces, whether it's how we put those guardrails together. You know, the folks that are federal government level are we saw with social media, there was not as much understanding of what needed to be in place. If some of you probably heard last year, about 300 of the primary researchers in AI wrote a letter that said we need to pause for the next 6 months and figure out what is the structure, how are we going to govern ourselves, how are we going to position ourselves for safety. So, hi. How are you? You're okay. And so thinking through, you know, what role could your students have in that work here? also the importance of the collaborative and interdisciplinary skills that you all have built, I think is critical because you need to be able to explain what is behind AI, how to use it, and how we can use it for better collaboration, which is key to the peace and justice efforts. Obviously, it can be used in terms of anticipating crisis predictions, responses to that. Project management is a key skill, being able to figure out how you're going to integrate this in your organizations, be that in for-profit, nonprofit, government, any organization is going to need to grapple with this. You'll notice I did give some examples that are a little more business oriented, just because that's where I sit currently, but this applies across organization type for sure. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just making sure we're all using the same language. So in terms of different types of AI, I'm going to break them down by application to start with. So there's natural language processing, which, that ChatGPT and that whole movement. But this is an incredibly powerful tool, particularly for qualitative research. So if you are collecting interviews or doing sentiment analysis or those sorts of things, the natural language processing tools can be incredibly powerful. Machine learning broadly is think about all the algorithms that are driving how analysis is happening. And I have to always point out when I talk about algorithms, two of my favorite books about this, Automating Inequality, which I think is a really important book for folks in this space to understand how currently these algorithms, because of the bias that's embedded in them, because of them being trained on past, that we need to understand that bias to be able to make sure that we're building for a future of equity. So that's one book, and then Weapons of Math Destruction, and yes, I am that nerdy, is the other book that I think are really great reads. They have very concrete examples of how algorithms are being used in many of our social systems, whether that's the child welfare system and how we rate how we predict risk in juvenile justice, any of those sorts of things. Those have been driven by algorithms for years now, whether we knew that or not. So really understanding that piece of it. Obviously, like now we're talking a lot more about generative AI, where we're, taking a picture and turning it into a song or those sorts of things. So where it's creating something new. This is also where we see more danger around deep fakes and those sorts of things. So understanding those tools and how they can be used. Obviously, there's a lot from a vision perspective that can be used in terms of AI as well. So even if it's just how you unlock your phone these days, or if it is, how folks are gathering data about, for example, a company that's emitting more methane than we realized, and we now through visual can see that emission, or we can look at forest management, for example, and see what are the types of trees that are in there. And that doesn't require me taking a picture of it anymore. There are tools that can do a lot of those things for you. And then, of course, these deep learning and expert systems, those are the sorts of things that are trained on large models of data that then can be built into products to be able to answer questions. Think about, the chat bots in different tools that we use and that sort of thing. So we could move to the common uses, just so folks can see.
I'm trying to get there. Same folks that we did.
One more. That was that one. By what you would see in any type of organization. So whether it's my company or others, whether it's a nonprofit, there's customer service. So providing chatbots, virtual assistants, those sorts of things. Fraud detection is a big thing where AI can be very useful in looking at patterns and trying to understand the usage there. Product development, so being able to collect data about preferences, optimizing your product design. We use it in automating testing all the time. So being able to kind of throw data at something, is it working in the way that we would expect it to? Marketing and sales is a huge area for using AI, whether that's targeted ads, content creation, lead generation, all of those sorts of things. HR, the AI has been used in HR for a long time, and right now that is one of the areas where we're paying a lot of attention to algorithmic bias. So how are we reading for what keywords? You know, we run all of the applications through a tool that's looking for things to pull out. But are we making sure that we have human eyes on that? Are we making sure that we understand what those biases are going to be that are embedded in that algorithm? Operations, logistics, how you move stuff, supply chain, you know, well, no matter what type of company or entity you're working with, there's stuff. And how does it get from one place to another? And how do we understand like when, we expect something's gonna break down. How do we fix it a month before it breaks down so we don't end up having a longer term problem that, you know, halts our business? And then, of course, cybersecurity is another big area where AI is used across organizations. The next one, the next slide that we're still talking about common uses, but now we're talking about them a little bit more in different sectors. So as opposed to in the functionality in the organization, it's broken down a little bit more by sector usage. So if in healthcare, or how is AI being used to accelerate the work, getting to more accurate diagnoses, analyzing what we can't always see in as detailed a way with the human eye, those sorts of things. So there's incredible innovation and hopefulness in my mind in this slide of where we can go, what tools we can use for the betterment of society as a result. So a lot of it's about optimizing efficiency, whether, which is finance's whole thing. But how do we make decisions? How do we pull in more information than I could necessarily process? I'm a good researcher. I can, look at what people put out in their reports, but I can't scan that amount of information in the same way that one of these tools can and actually be able to come out with what are the key salient points. So you see it used in education, entertainment, public services. I won't spend too much time on each of these, but I did want to, head to the, perfect. Think about why we use AI in the workplace. So, across the board, it does make you more efficient. And that's why so many businesses and organizations are integrating this, is because it just is possible to process so much more information than you could with human beings. It means that you can serve your customers better. It helps you with decisions by having, I'm one of those people who likes as much information as possible, and then I can make decisions. My business partner is not. He's like, I'm just gonna start running and I'm sure we'll get somewhere. So, those are the moments that our two different brains work together. But being able to quickly model something, obviously as a business owner, I'm always looking at cost reduction strategies and how do we make sure, because I'd rather be able to pay my employees more. So if I can speed something up, that really does create a better working environment. We look at it through the lens of safety. I've got a lot of companies that are doing manufacturing, trucking, those sorts of things, which are high risky or high risk entities. And so that's something for them that they need to make sure they can address effectively.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So going to the uses,
Yeah.
for example, in cost reduction, how do you use AI, or can you give an example?
Mhm.
So to ground it for me,
Sure.
I love it, so I just want to understand.
Yeah. So we were working with an entity that was, they were trying to reduce their energy usage. And they, by using AI to understand what level of traffic was hitting kind of their machinery, they realized there was about 12 hours a day that they could essentially shut down part of their operations, which saves them a significant amount of money. So helping people to see what those different efficiencies are that then create that savings. Another example, trying to think of another good cost saving one that we've recently worked on. You know, we will run models based on a lot of federally available data, so census tract data. We then create algorithms and data enhancements to be able to, so I don't have to go out and do the research and find what the you know, average benefit usage is in healthcare. I can run that algorithmically and get that and be able to then put context around that, so then the leadership can make better decisions about what benefits packages to provide. Is that?
Yeah, very much.
So now we move to the risk side of things. And I think this is an important place as we started out the conversation of like, who's on the terrified side? Like, what are the things that we can do? Why is it important to really think about risk right now? We are at the forefront of this movement, and we have an opportunity now to control the way in which it grows. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in your organizations. It's happening, you know, I'm sure in your classrooms, those sorts of things. And so getting your arms around what is it? What are the tools? How do I use them? And then how do I make sure that they are, that we are planning for what are some of the dangers we know are coming? So, for example, you know, this right now, AI is touching every industry. I mean, even think ChatGPT, I'm sure most folks use it. You know, have any of you been tracking what's been happening with OpenAI in the last couple of weeks? Yeah. I'll just give a very quick thumbnail, but OpenAI was created as a nonprofit to ensure that these tools that were being developed were going to be developed and distributed equitably. They were going to be, you know, not something that was solely about money making, but also was about, you know, advancements for society. They are now trying to transition into a for-profit company, which then will change the incentive structure for leadership. Many of the folks who were a part of it just in the last week have their CTO, the chair of their board have said, I'm out. I'm not a part of this because I don't believe this is the right direction to go. So who owns AI? Who owns the data? Right now, you know, most of us are using 2 or 3 entities, and is that going to concentrate wealth and power and opportunity in very few places? How do little businesses like mine use those tools, but without necessarily telling them, here's all the stuff we do. Oh, now you could go build exactly what I do. And so figuring out how you protect those different models is critical right now. I mean, I think the opacity of especially like algorithmic bias, we all know, I mean, think about LinkedIn, we talked about earlier today. How does a post actually like start to get traffic? It is not just a natural like, hey, if enough people look at it. I've got marketing over here, you know, there are a bunch of different tricks that we're doing that, you know, are part of how that business was built out. But they don't tell you that. They don't give you the manual in how each one of these things are going to be rated and valued. And they change them often because once people figure out the tricks, then they need to adjust so that folks can, you know, have an opportunity to see their actual friends' posts or those sorts of things. So it's just a really important critical stage that we're in, I think, for understanding the different risks that are available. Please.
If you could, I mean, I'll sketch out my like thumbnail of like how I thought this went down, and you can correct me.
Yeah.
What I thought was so interesting about this was that it was a for-profit company, but it was held entirely by a nonprofit, right?
Mhm.
Like, so there was like this shell, it was like a for-profit company in a nonprofit shell. The nonprofit board then had a bunch of ethicists
Yes.
and technology experts, and it was like the Bostroms of the world, right? Like, who were concerned about these risks.
Mhm.
At the same time, ChatGPT was being developed and trained, it was the technology needs, and just in terms of like raw processing power, were so heavy
Mhm.
that even though Microsoft was not on the board, it had a heavy say in what happened, because the like data was being transferred back. It was not like in-house servers that were doing this, it's all Microsoft servers, and Microsoft now, gets exclusive access to, the use of new ChatGPT or new OpenAI tools and exploits them through Bing. And so like for me, it was like this sort of experiment in like, are we able to build the sorts of institutions that prevent the Microsofts of the world and like create guardrails around it? And like, I think everybody, from my point of view, just kind of like freaking out, because it seems like, no, like, the concerns here are humongous, like, they are so powerful. The profit margins are like potentially enormous, and it's just like larger than these like 3 to 5 people that you met in grad school and like shared at some like common bond around like your ethical, whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not sure if like, I was following this like more like on a day-to-day basis for a little while there, and I've kind of fallen off because it's a lot to keep up with, but like.
It is, and I would say I've sort of clued in at when Sam Altman left last year and then was reinstated in 5 days, and.
It was very exciting.
That was wild. But then this most recent couple of weeks has been, the CTO stepping down and others, kind of shed another light on what was happening.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so the CTO and others, I mean, they're stepping down because they don't like the direction it's headed as far as risks.
Yeah.
So that's bad in many minds. I mean, it's a scary thing because it opens it up to them being able to do.
Well, it also goes to the question of who should,
Yeah.
right? How do you police something that is very complicated? And the business models are built on having opaqueness, and having these black boxes, because that's what makes the money. And what is the role of government? What is the role of like self-policing in terms of, I mean, I think about the academic sphere, peer-reviewed journals having particular, standards and IRB, institutional review boards and other things where folks said, okay, we as academics, we were not protecting human subjects. And so then they put into place, yes, these are the standards. And I think that there is a movement right now around that of what are those standards that we could set as the experts in this. That was the letter last year of the 300 different researchers that said, like, we need to put those pieces together. What are the requirements for this? And sort of blew past it.
I feel like there's also like a question of, I mean, I think you speak well to this sort of need for some kind of international regulatory framework. Because it's very, I think that, when they created the OpenAI system, they were like to their minds, they were thinking so far ahead and had developed so far past what many other competitors had done. Lots of people thought like AI is gonna be big in a decade, and Sam Altman was like, no, AI is gonna be big in 2 years, like.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be using it in 2 years, like we need to be ahead of this. And at the time, you could sort of think, oh, like nobody else has this, so maybe we can like create this little microcosmic good governance framework.
Right.
But they're like, and then no, like China's at how many mega like teraflops and like, no, like we're gonna lose this market completely if we don't just go. And so there's this like, there's this competition question as well, like if you're not ahead of it, you're behind it, and you're not gonna, it's not gonna matter that you have a good governance around this because it's already being done to you.
Yeah, no, I think you're pointing to many of the major challenges that we are in right now, which is why it's so important for folks with this kind of background to be in those conversations and to be a part of not just, how do we set up the right regulatory framework, but also how do we help the entities that we're in be a part of that, be a part of standardizing what is required, whether that's governmentally, whether that's nonprofits, whether that's for profits, and what are those different levers of change. And again, I go back to, we've learned this in a couple of other major like industrial revolution kind of shifts. When the vehicle happened, when like we know what some of those risks are, and we also know what levers we can pull on. And so how do we bring that to bear to this conversation before we're well down the way? I think is the aim.
Are there any, rumblings about an international framework or any kind of starts conversations that, or even national, like US government frameworks around?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, and I've got at the back of this, I went through the different regulatory environments. So these are just sort of additional. Yeah, if you just flip to regulatory environment.
What's the punchline?
I know, you wanna get to it, this one? Yeah, so, and then there are probably like 6 more slides of the different efforts that are happening from a regulatory perspective. And so, NIST is one that I'll talk a little bit about that has a playbook. I mean, so you can see there are lots of different efforts, and I have links to all of them. I think there were supposed to be links. There are links on many. But happy to share these if folks want to go down that rabbit hole. I think right now it is a little bit fragmented, and so then figuring out who is going to lead those conversations and bring them together and normalize those from a regulatory perspective. But these conversations are happening. It's just a matter of like how to bring them together when there's still such incredible accelerations in the space. We can go back,
I
yeah,
have a question about
please.
the regulatory environment. So with all these entities trying to establish regulations around it, like what problems could that pose in terms of just like different people wanting different things out?
Yeah. I think it is a really important question of when are we going to bring those conversations together? And who has the knowledge to lead? So, for example, we've got the White House here. These are not technologists, these are not ethicists, these are policymakers. And so they need to be informed. You've seen many different times where Mark Zuckerberg is brought in front of Congress and just like runs circles around them in terms of the understanding of what should be regulated. And so I think that the effort coming out of the research community is really important, but I also want to see that balance with more of the social movement, kind of social justice perspective, because it's very easy. I don't know how many of you work with technologists, but sometimes they're not paying attention to like the big picture of where this is, like, what are the things from a systems perspective that we can anticipate this is going to affect down the road? How do we scenario plan around like, okay, if we if we make this decision here, what are the 10 things that could be affected and from a ripple perspective? And so that's where I don't feel like the conversations have come together adequately yet. You've got those conversations starting, and then I expect in the next year or two, there will be an effort to coordinate amongst those.
I would also like,
Please.
I mean, I just looked, while I was on my phone, just not trying to be rude, I was trying to remember what the bill was that Gavin Newsom just vetoed. He vetoed a bunch of bills just recently, but one of them was SB 1047, which would compel AI companies to take safety measures, and one of the reasons that he vetoed it was because he's trying to, I think, telegraph that he's like a strong pro-technology, pro-business governor in this, during this electoral cycle, as you know, he's being called new scum by Trump, and like, what, right, like, he doesn't want to have any cracks there. And so like, if it's like the state where most of this is being developed, and you can bring regulations to bear, it's like, it's difficult to see, yeah, it's just such a political thing, right, like. So, yeah.
Question, I'm sorry. It's around career services or and careers for students who are leaving the Kroc school and going out into jobs that may be impacted by AI and their stakeholders. Like, how can our students be prepared, right? Either from a policy perspective, just sort of like the technical skills that they need to do around AI, and advocating, right? You said you need more of these groups, advocacy groups and social movement groups, and to spearhead that conversation. How can our students like equip themselves better to engage in the future of AI and the types of organizations that they're going to engage in? What do you see as sort of like the key things that they need to know?
I mean, I personally do think it's a lot of the skill sets that you all are teaching in terms of, critical thinking, project management, it is advocacy components. So understanding how social movements happen, and then which pieces of that, which tools they can bring to bear. But I think the grounding in justice, in peace, in collaborative and cross-disciplinary work, as well as kind of the applied approach that you take. Those are really critical skills that I don't see in this field right now. So like, I want someone who has kind of an ethics perspective sitting in those conversations around OpenAI, or helping governments understand this set of different tools that can be brought to bear and is being brought to bear on almost every company that I interact with. I think I had the I've been asked the question 3 times today. How AI'd are you? Like how much is it integrated into your work? And so that's part of why I was thinking about this conversation from a like, okay, are we on the same page? Do we understand what this is? And then how it's playing out in each different workplace, and then what roles your students could play. So I'd almost turn it to your students to say, like, in terms of how you think about your training thus far, because I haven't sat in the classes to understand exactly, how this is being talked about in terms of what are the tools. I mean, there are so many different directions, I assume, that your students go, whether that's in the, social enterprise, government, for-profit entities, consulting, I don't know what everybody's directions are.
Yeah, I want to speak to that. And also comment on the regulations bit. And also talk about how I'm doing it, because like this is my right after my line of career. So I'm Kenyan. Worked in Kenya all my career life, but also worked for tech companies that provide like support services to tech companies that are building AI products, right? So pretty much companies like mine provide companies like Meta and the rest training data that they use to train algorithms, right? So if you need enough examples of ChatGPT prompts to teach the algorithm to like write better prompts, then we'll have many people, you know, a lot of that service is outsourced to Africa and Asia, right? So have people in Africa writing example prompts. If Google needs to build like a biometric technology, if they need to collect samples of different faces, skin color, whatever, you know, a lot of that is outsourced to Asia and Africa, right? So a big loophole in the regulations is that a big bit of this work that is being outsourced to areas of the world where there's not enough regulation, right? So Europe and the West have done a good job, and there's a lot of regulation being put together and policies and being enforced. But the other players are not keeping up with the policy. So that's one big loophole that I wanted to call out. And governments are not necessarily prioritizing those for their countries, right? So a good example is one big thing that happened in Kenya, became a big political situation where a gaming company was collecting like pictures of people without, they get consent, but they were not educated what their images would be used for, right? So, anyway, my point being, tying back to now how students are thinking about it, how I'm thinking about it is, I'm trying to see how I can merge my experience and start maybe specializing and learning more about the ethics of AI and see how I can use that, because I have advantage of seeing how this technology is built. I come from a nation where there's not much advocacy for these kinds of things, that maybe I could be a voice. I'm also trying to learn the political dynamics of it, because beyond the business and all this is the politics, like Kenya, for small countries, South Africa, is their voice big enough to treat this, at the very least, can I influence this locally from a government and say, hey, when we're taking this work, these are the conversations we need to have with these tech companies. And how I'm equipping myself is through, selection of courses. Like last semester, I took a course in School of Engineering with Ethics of AI. I'm having conversations with people who are in the field to expand my mind, because my scope is only limited by what I've seen. But yeah, in short, I was just tying that to how I'm doing it personally. But yeah, really, I think it's a very interesting and emerging area that I want to pursue for sure.
Yeah,
Can I add something? Because it just makes me think that, as I'm listening to this, I finished a certificate on cybersecurity. I wanted to come to your talk. I think it starts also with the faculty. I don't know, Topher seems well versed, but I don't know how well versed everyone is. So I think as students sort of tell us their agendas and their interests, and we hear speakers of, who are out there and, practicing and leading. Well, these are some of the things that, you can read it in the New York Times, but it's beyond that. How do we become more fluent on, hey, as a faculty member, this is, if you teach social entrepreneurship or social innovation, these are the kind of modules that I should be inserting, or speakers or case studies or whatever it is. I think we have a ways to go there, and I'm so happy I'm here, so we can propose that to move forward, because I'm pushing myself and I'm like overwhelmed, now I'm writing teaching notes for cases with ChatGPT, and I'm like, I have somebody who's coaching and saying, oh my goodness. And I spent before, I was like working like a maniac, now and you have to use your critical thinking to make it work. But it's just like this, okay, I'm on to the next case. I'm gonna win some award this year. But no, honestly, I'm a joke aside, but I think it's, we, in the classroom, we need to modify our syllabi to really fit this new world, and I don't think we're even close. And I think maybe it's even in conversation with students.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I will say that, like, the case study of our company that I was gonna talk a little about was like, my partner Kelly is, he's a technologist, he's fluent in it, he's like, jumping on every tool before, and then, he basically said to our entire team, like, yeah, you can use all these for any of it, and I was like, wait a minute, no. And so I needed to get educated and comfortable, and also understand what are the limitations, and I needed to ask those questions of like, okay, what are the risks for us? How do we know, and how do we categorize, and what's our process? Because, I've got employees who are using ChatGPT, sure, but I'll tell you, I had a team put together a set of slides that they were about to take out to clients to a presentation about the data, and I looked at like, I think it was slide 4, and I was like, can you speak to what is on that slide? Cause if not, you cannot go to a customer and or a client and present this. I could speak to what's on that slide, but can you? Cause you're the one in the meeting. And they were like, no, I don't understand what half of this is. Then you take it off the slide. So figuring out that, or we built a AI summarizer to take, we bring in articles every week that we think are good for our clients and they're good content. So they started using it to develop out the summaries, so we're not taking someone else's intellectual property and putting it on our site, but we can put a summary and a link to what the article was. Well, they started almost populating it on our site, and I was like, well, okay, can you send me the link and the summary? I'm gonna go read the first 10. I'm gonna read the article. That's not what this summary says. So absolutely not, that's not we cannot just be populating it, because basically our clients come to us with an understanding that we are gonna help them navigate this complicated space, and that we're gonna give that expertise. So we can't put anything out there that we don't stand behind. Now that helped us, and we spent many iterations going through what is the right prompt that is going to get us the kind of summary that we need. And now I spot check every, 100 as opposed to looking at every single one, but that was, I'm the backstop on all of those sorts of things. Other folks are like, yeah, let's put it up there, and I'm like, but what if it's not right? Did we check whether it's right? So figuring out how you build in that process and interact with it. I mean, I think about AI as it gets you 9/10 of the way there. So it speeds up your ability to like write that initial thing, but you've gotta put your stamp on it and make sure that you understand like how it got there, and does it actually accurately reflect what you would want to say. So there's sort of this like continued back and forth that you're interacting with.
I agree.
In my opinion. This is all my opinion, by the way. Yeah, other questions? I know is this done at 1:30? I didn't know what.
45.
Okay.
I'm a student.
Yeah.
And I think I'm on the terrified end of the spectrum. So I'd like to speak to that a little bit.
Please.
But I would also say that my background is in journalism. And since I've been here, I've been pulled towards a lot of misinformation, disinformation, understanding all those processes. And this is a dream, right, for misinformation, disinformation. Years ago, I was teaching a nonfiction, a required class. If you wanted to be a writing major at UCSD, you had to take the nonfiction class, and I had to explain over and over again, this is what makes it nonfiction, this is what makes it fiction, and students were writing their own work. And over again, it seems so adorable and quaint, but I would say, did you make it up? Yes, that's fiction.
Right.
Did someone say it? No, you can't put it in quotes. It was simple, it was easy. It was still terrifying how often I had to explain that in the course of the semester, but now it's all changed and it's all different. What I'm hearing is that there's an inevitability to AI, which I appreciate, because every day, we were just doing a little recording for the podcast, every day I learned something new that ChatGPT can do. And it's great.
Yeah.
And so every week I'm learning more about how I can use it and what I can do with it. But there's still this other side, like, did no one but me watch the Terminator movies?
Right.
Because that is the way I sometimes think about this.
Sure.
The idea of, I mean, we can't figure out climate change. We've been trying for decades, so how are we gonna internationally figure out AI? And so I do have these moments, and you said 9/10 of the way there. I would, because I'm resistant, I like to go with 6/10. You know, because I think I'm dragging my feet a little bit because of the, the terror. My oldest son sent he graduated college, he sent 2 photographs to the family group chat, so it's not public, it's just the 5 of us.
Mhm.
These 2 photographs were completely fake, and my husband and I didn't know,
Right,
but the siblings did. And they told us after we made super embarrassing comments.
sure.
And I think of that and I think, but why were you trying to trick us?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's completely harmless, but I do have these moments where I think, what if someone really bad
So
is trying to trick people, which is obviously already happening.
that's exactly why I think it's so important to have these conversations. I want the skeptics to be a part of the conversation that's saying, wait, in my mind, there are 15 ways this could go wrong. Have we addressed any of them? And to push the field, because just creating it because it can be created does not make it inherently, like, to me, AI is not inherently good or evil, but it could be used for both. And so I want smart people who understand that to be a part of the conversation about how we address that. And that's part of why I have tried to build my own literacy in it, because I'm a believer that, like, you know, burying our head in the sand around this right now is not, it means they're missing out on that critical perspective in the conversation that you could bring, which is an understanding of how it should be used, how, what should be controlled, how are we making sure we're thinking about Terminator, and what are the steps we're taking to prevent those disasters. Yeah.
So what I also interested in is how AI on one hand is a tool, but at the same time it also shapes our culture and our societies, or how we interact with each other. And for example, I see also a lot of potential that it can undermine trust between people, or trust in information and in these institutions, or also create more distance between people and undermine accountability. So do you know of any like movements or people thinking about what culture must we create so we can kind of counter some of the negative potential, or maybe reinforce some of the positive potential that's the effect of AI on culture and society could have?
I mean, I don't know of any group that's coming together with that specific angle. I think many of them acknowledge that this AI explosion is happening at the same time as we have, you know, more political discord, more divisiveness in societies, like, you know, whether it's end stage capitalism or, you know, there are some things that are happening in societies across the world right now. And certainly social media has been part of that driver. But being able to look at AI through that lens and how it is going to be both potentially contributing to furthering some of those, but how could we also use it to counter some of those movements, I think is a fascinating conversation, and I don't know where that's happening right now. Yeah.
I was wondering if you had, well, I mean, first, like your description of like AI generated crap that you have to like.
Yeah.
Is, and that resonated with me so much because, so I read this master's in humanitarian action, right? And we have a contract with a PR firm that I think is basically just mostly 20-somethings who live in Burlington, Vermont, and just like put this stuff together using AI and then just send it to me. And so and I think originally got this because they said, would you be able to put out a blog post every week? I was like, no, I have no time to do that. So they got these people to do it, and now they just use them, I think, just to anger me enough. To be like, that's not right, I'm going to write this.
Have you talked to my marketing people?
But it's so crazy how like that you get into these like endogenous sort of feedback loops where like they'll say, what, give me examples of prominent humanitarians. And Google will say, Oprah Winfrey, Bono, Angelina Jolie, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. I'm like, none of those are humanitarians in the sense that we mean for all sorts of different reasons. And like, let me like scrape them all off the list and like replace them with like Jan Egeland and like whomever. But I think that that's kind of interesting that like, were they to be successful, they would have then created the material that would reinforce what they had searched for, and like, there's just this like, yeah, so like having a cultural sort of like a critical feedback, like, I need that to a negative feedback loop there, rather than a positive one, is important. But I guess I'm also just sort of wondering, going forward, I feel like we're thinking a lot about how AI can be used in ways that disadvantage certain populations.
Yeah.
And I which is like immensely important. But I have been starting to have conversations about like emergent AI, like once we get beyond just LLMs, but LLMs are now like one subsystem of memory and stimulus processing and planning and all of the rest of these systems that like eventually merge into general AI, right? And at some point, like we already saw when that Blake Lemoine, the Google engineer who was like having a conversation and someone was like, well, this passes my Turing test. Like it says it's alive. We haven't yet put any of the parameters that say don't be weird and creepy like that on it, but it's telling me it's alive and please don't turn me off.
Right.
Like, and Google's like, no, it's not, you're fired. There's going to be like a huge incentive. Anyway, there's a huge corporate incentive not to recognize sentience when it arrives.
Totally.
And so like to be able to anticipate that and say, you know, we already agreed as a society that slavery is not okay in any form. Can we recognize when it happens next?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
And what different ways that could play out. I mean, that's exactly why it's important that you or I, you know, I'm like, no, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know what is good. That's why I know this isn't good as a social scientist. Like I have built my expertise around this, and you know, I think ensuring folks are critically thinking and are willing to push back and to say, to recognize the imperfections and also those imperfections that are built in. So I think the you know, algorithmic bias is a big one in terms of understanding that like that data was created based on a history of systemic racism, of bias. I mean, your example of facial recognition software is an important one because if we don't think about how that is going to, you know, make one group, it would basically give them more power. And, you know, really fundamentally, this does come down to some of those things. What institutions do we need? What protections? Like, this is happening, this is coming, and we know what questions, like where we have fallen off on other innovation cycles. And so why wouldn't we try to get ahead of that now?
Yeah.
But who is in power, how those decisions, like even just how capital is flowing right now to what companies. So the OpenAI example, like, you know, the amount of money and valuation when they had not produced a thing yet. That is a perverse incentive structure. in my opinion. And we can go off about venture capital and, you know, the inequities there, but like right now, thinking about how, knowledge and power and money come together, you know, these are pretty fundamental in a society.
Just to add to that, I think that confirms to us that not just for AI, but technology generally, it's nothing new, it's just automated way of what we do things as human beings anyways, right? So it just makes it faster to extrapolate who we are. So the whole conversation around even internet, what kind of content is on social media, people should not be flabbergasted because that's what we do offline, right? Right? If it's about AI, we are teaching AI using human examples, whether it's already existing data created by humans or this newly created data, which I was talking about earlier, that's being generated out of, it's by other humans, right? So if you use, for example, historical data from a bank to create an algorithm to make loan decisions to discriminate women and Black people, for example, or if you create, like, it's just, I think as human beings, all the things that we needed to fix for before technology still apply that we need to fix for, because technology is just extrapolating and blowing up who we are. So I think they still all apply, all the things we're not solved for before technology, we're just carrying them forward, only in a more scary, faster way. Yeah, so it's a big conversation. I don't know if we'll solve it in our lifetime. I don't know if people in this room will be here for another 100 years. I don't know. That's the thing that scares me. I'm on the spectrum of hopeful, but the idea of like, what can you reasonably solve for in our lifetime is what I'm like, okay, can we fix for, do something in our lifetime and then hand over to the next generation to like figure it out. But it's yeah, a big problem.
Yeah, I'm with you on the hopeful side, and that it is about much more fundamental kind of societal and human tendencies and you know what drives people and those incentive structures. But I also am a believer that like you have to take the steps that you can take in the work that you can make a difference on. I know that there, especially kind of younger generation, have been talking about this sort of just apathy and overwhelmedness of like, I don't even know where to start, the problems are so big. I'm here to push everybody I can. Bianca knows I just went off on a rant about it on social media about climate change and just do something, act. And I guess that's the thing that I want to, you know, hopefully have folks like you all as part of that action, to say, you know, no, it can't all be concentrated in a few hands, and we need to think about how this is going to affect folks disproportionately and raise the hard questions because we're the only ones who can. And I just think it's important for folks to be empowered in knowing the tools, knowing the language, because oftentimes these conversations do get kind of isolated in rooms where it's an echo chamber. And, you know, that taking a seat at those tables, being a part of the conversation, being the squeaky wheel that's like, hey, wait a minute, I actually think there are 10 different things we need to consider before we can launch this product. We need that in our society. We need that in organizations. We need that in our relationships, you know. We all, I would love it if everybody thought the way that my brain did, but also, you know, I have a business partner who thinks totally differently and it causes some strife at times, but it makes what we do in the end better to balance that out. And so whether it's just individual human interaction, whether it's in organizations, which are made up of people, whether it's in broader society, like I think that's important in figuring out how to have that language, how to, you know, speak that language and bring that perspective to these conversations is going to be really important.
Just gonna be asking the question too, like if you're working at an organization and you just ask the question, what are y'all doing about AI?
Yeah.
To see what happens after that. They're like, we don't talk about it, we do. I mean, it's just starting something, it's starting somewhere, right? And
it's a really powerful tool. It's basically like my entire company is asking questions that people go, oh, I haven't thought about that. Should I? Okay. How do I do that, you know?
And I'm curious, maybe for the politicians in the room, like why hasn't this subject taken so much traction like we've seen? I know like for climate, it's been like multiple decades of work. Right now, there's like global attention around it. But what gets an issue to a certain state like this topic of climate, where there's a lot of global attention, a lot of investment money, wide, like why isn't this topic getting that kind of traction politically and wise? Is it this politics in the background at play? Is it a money game? I don't know, I'm just curious, but it sounds like someone should be jumping at this thing and there's no big people who are jumping at it, like, who knows? I'm curious, I don't know much about politics, but I'm wondering why it's not taking.
Someone hasn't jumped on a bandwagon or politicians
Yeah.
saying this is my issue or.
Or even just investment like, I don't know, UN or something, create a whole body just around this or. I was just like, I thought you'd have more noise globally, but.
Maybe people are afraid of it just because of technology. I've heard about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in movements, you often have kind of the early adopters, so in those circles, that's where that conversation is happening, and it's very sort of insular. And now there's going to be wider adoption, and so others who maybe aren't experts in this are gonna be saying, hey, wait, what about this? How does this connect to this? And you know, I think that's normal in
Natural
terms
cycle.
of, yeah, exactly, that adoption, you know, the people who are creating it aren't necessarily the ones who are thinking about how do I make sure this is happening equally, and whose role is that when we don't have necessarily a global governing body? And so, you know, what institutions have power to be able to regulate entities? You know, which is why you're seeing more of that, at least in terms of some of the negative implications like data privacy, for example. And you brought up sort of, did folks have permission to use images and how they were using them? So I think there are pieces of this that folks are really focusing on regulating. So in the EU, there's been a lot around data privacy requirements. California has done a good job in setting out, you know, you get to own your data. But it did take a few people, you know, fighting the system. It takes, you know, legal action when there are things that have gone wrong. And then, you know, broader kind of awareness, education, making sure people speak the same language. So there are a lot of different components that come together to get to that place.
I think that part that you just touched on is kind of something I was in the middle, but after this conversation, I'm like teetering more towards the beautiful side, just because we had a conversation earlier with another student, and she brought up to us the fact that people are using deepfakes to create podcasts, right? And like it sounds like a human voice and it acts like a human voice. The conversation is very natural almost, but it's AI. And then you see it also with Google, like now you search something and it's like an AI generated answer.
Yeah.
You're not like, it's almost surface level, right? And you're not really doing the research yourself. And I think the lack of knowledge, to your point of, and the lack of education around AI and people not really understanding how it can really be detrimental to people's understanding of war ultimately, in whatever subject, whatever matter. It's just being played out by people who are kind of taking advantage of that lack of knowledge. And so like regulations, I think, are extremely important. I think Patricia's comment about infusing it into curriculum is important because every sector is at risk of AI affecting it. But like, I'm very hopeful still. Like, I know it sounds like I'm scared now, but I see the positives and the negatives, but I think ultimately it boils down to the education aspect of.
Yeah.
Just as a layman, like you look at AI and I know my parents, I've had conversations with them, they're like, oh, I don't understand it. Like I just got my mom on LinkedIn this year and she's like, I love it. It's like, okay, but do you know, like, LinkedIn can be very scary too, you could be learning a lot of stuff that is being generated in a negative connotation, so I think just, hopefully every generation has different understandings. I know younger generations are gonna be infused with it even more, especially with the content. I know my nephew's like, he's seeing a lot of deep fakes already, I'm like, well, how are you getting suggested the content? Like, what are you interacting with that gives you this? So like, all those are being really kind of affected by AI for sure.
Yeah, there's no question, and I mean, I guess, my hope wasn't necessarily to like send more people to the terrified side, but more to the empowered and the sort of eyes wide open. And willingness to ask the hard questions, because, you know, if anyone's going to affect this, and it's interesting, because I was in a conversation with someone who was talking about like the workforce in AI, and you know, we just need a bunch of like computer science folks, and I'm like, do we teach ethics in computer science? Do we teach, you know, like where are those kind of conversations happening? And I do think it's in a school like this. And so if I were building an AI company right now, I would not just be hiring MBAs or you know, computer scientists. I would want the others who are going to say, actually, you shouldn't do that. Even if you could.
I would even go like one step further to say like, man, I know so many sort of parents of young kids who like, so my kids are 10 and 15 right now. And when their friends were super young, I have a few friends who just like put them rigorously through coding camps and stuff. And are now realizing like, none of that shit matters actually.
Totally.
Like I have spent like a large part of my life learning how to code for statistical programs. And now when I like run up against a problem, I'm just like, how do I do, like, I can't do this, how do I do it? Like, oh, that works, thanks. Like, it doesn't matter any longer. And so I feel like having people who can think critically about things that's way more important than think about like systems, thinking about how to plug into a range of different applications and how it changes the dynamics of the whole system, much more important.
When I'm looking to hire people, it is very rarely on like, how well do they code? It is how well do they think? It is how well do they communicate? And are they curious?
Have you heard about the underlay? It's a project that's being undertaken by the Knowledge Futures Group, which is a spin-off of the MIT Media Lab, which is then like has now been kind of reacquired by MIT Press, sort of.
Okay.
But they're trying to create a kind of architecture for knowledge, like all machine readable knowledge, that rather than just being like this free floating system of like everything creating bits and bobs from everything else and this sort of combinatorial sludge, that's like it attaches meaning to everything that's said, and then creates a network of these nodes of meaning to say this reinforces this, and this reinforces this, and this reinforces this, and this thing is not reinforced by anyone credible. So like that gets de-weighted in the system, and so it's like interesting. It's trying to like infinite jest our lives. So
yeah, I mean, I do think I will dig into that, and I'm very interested in sort of how they're building that out, but I also think, you know, if you are able to think critically and to challenge and to say, you know, to kind of bring that expertise, you will always have a job. Like there are a lot of things that can be automated. That is not one of them right now, at least yet. I realize we didn't get through tons, but I can send these slides if folks are interested.
If you're willing to, I would love to I can put them, well, we can also, like, if you consider these to be just for Kroc school use, you can put them behind the firewall, like whatever you feel good about, but we can put the recording of this and the slides up on our digital repository.
Sure.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.